Welcome to Tech Royalty, where we celebrate the kings of tech. I'm here with my boy, the big tech genius guru, my man Esco Obong. Give him some applause. My man's in the building. Yeah, we're gonna get into it. He's gonna have some good stuff for y'all. He's very knowledgeable. He's been doing this thing for a while, and we actually have some similar things in our background as far as starting tech, as far as being a college dropout. But Esco, I'm gonna let you go into your story and let us know how you got into tech.
Yeah. No, thanks for the introduction. So yeah, my story. So I grew up in a low income public housing, Section 8. For those not familiar with Section 8, basically is subsidized housing for people who are basically in poverty, who can't afford to have their own housing. And it's usually for families. And then, as you get older, people kind of get grandfathered in and so on. And, for my case, it was a single mother household with 4 kids, no support from any of the fathers, nothing like that. And we had to, she was raising us on our own. She had to go out to work, get a job, and we had to be in her house, getting raised by our siblings, basically, whenever there wasn't any time, any gaps. And then when it came to like food and stuff, that could have been an issue sometimes. We got evicted twice. I got evicted twice from there. One is when I was 10, we was all there. Another time when I was 19, when, my mother had passed away and I had to take over. But even before we go to that, so my journey started basically in between that when I was 14 years old. When I was 14, I had gotten this what they call crack right now. And not the drug crack, not that one. No, the software crack. And the software crack allows you to use programs that are very expensive for free. Mm-hmm. And there was this program called Flash. And I loved Flash I love Flash games because it was very popular at the time, around like 2003, 2004, where you would go online and like any kind of interactive media is in Flash. So I had aspirations for building animations for, I don't think at the time when I started, I wanted to make games, maybe because I didn't realize that was possible. But for whatever reason, I was into writing scripts when I was younger, even younger, like in elementary school, about anime type stuff. So I had wanted to make animations of those types of scripts. So that's what got me really into Flash. And then, once I started playing around with it, got the crack, started doing animations, spent many nights, many weekends playing around with it, getting more expertise. Then I found out there's a way to make animation even easier. Sorry. So I wanted to do this animation where there was a ball bouncing. And I found out you could do that with ActionScript. And ActionScript is it's similar to JavaScript. They all based on the ECMAScript standard. But ActionScript was a language for Flash. And I was able to use ActionScript to make the ball go up and down, and also from left to right. And also change the height, little by little to make it look like a little bounce. I was able to do all that just with coding, and it's way faster than animating it hand by hand, even with the tweens and everything. And I was just fascinated by that. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I wanted to kind of keep going forward with this. And I did a little thing where this little particle effect where you have a picture of like a fireball, and then you could have, I use a for loop to add multiple fireballs to the screen, and then each of them go off in their own predetermined direction. And then it looks like, just a fire blast. And it was like that type of stuff was real interesting, playing around with particle effects, playing around with different dimensions of stuff, animations through code. That's what really got me started. And that's how I started really in the front end realm. And then slowly over time, I shifted more to be full stack. Nowadays, I'm mostly doing back end stuff, but I still keep my front end skills up to date. Flash is dead right now. As far as if you want to go get a job as a Flash developer, good luck. Unless you already, have deep expertise and you're working on legacy systems, there's not many new opportunities in the Flash realm right now, which is why I was lucky how, ActionScript 2.0, 3.0 was based on something called ECMAScript, which is more of like a standard that defines how do you create a programming language without specifying the actual implementation. So JavaScript is based exactly on the same concepts as ActionScript. So that's why I was able to, more easily transition. And then things with the browser and the DOM, that is not the exact same as Flash as far as the UI, but it's similar concepts. And when I found out In the beginning, I didn't know you could like manipulate the DOM. I thought you could just, do alert messages. You can use CSS and all that stuff, but I didn't know you can actually create interactive applications with JavaScript at the time. It was like back in 2005, maybe 2006. And that's what really kind of pushed me forward into front end development with
Nice,
JavaScript. So yeah, I was
nice.
doing that from like, when I was 14. And then at the same time, there was opportunity that they brought up in school to do this College Now program. And basically College Now was a program where as a high school student, you could take college classes. And one of the classes was C++, intro to computer science 101, C++. So I did that course during that summer, and I excelled. I got an A in that course because the concepts that I learned, it's funny because I learned about classes and for loops and everything before that even started. And it was only like a few months before that started too, because of my foray into Flash. There was like documentation online, was it W3 schools, and like Flash Kit, and all these places where they tell you about different things. And I was making like a game, and it was like the hero class and the monster and the villain class. And when I look back, I'm like, that's kind of crazy. I didn't know anything about
Mm-hmm.
what a class was, but because it was in the context of a game, and I was like, okay, I need to make this hero entity. And I was actually having the actual problems that required a class to improve. That's another thing about learning things. Like people sit in school and learn these concepts that they don't have any applications for. They don't really internalize it, and they don't learn it as much because of that. Like they don't see the importance of it, and the connections don't get made in their mind because there's no direct use case. But for me, I wanted to make a game. I had this one panel that was all with ActionScript. I had like a variable like hero X, hero Y, monster X, monster Y, fireball X, whatever it was. Everything was in like one file, uh, all mushed together, and like it was very complicated. And I forgot exactly what I was searching, but when I came across this thing about using classes, I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is exactly what I need. So like that kind of mindset of like, this is what I need to solve a problem. I think that's the reason why it was real easy for me to understand what classes were, because I was having this problem. I was like, okay, everything inside this hero will be in this one container or this one block, even its own file. And it was way easier to say hero.x plus plus or plus equals 5 or however much you wanted to increase in the plane. And that kind of opened my eyes to just going out doing more and more research. Whenever I hit a roadblock, that's how I learn the best. If I want to learn something new, I just try to build something even if I know nothing about it. And then if I hit a roadblock, I have a specific goal, and the reason why I feel like I'm stuck is because I want to do something that I can do. And when I've had that goal, and I go online, go to Google, research it, and kind of find my answers from multiple different sources. All the time people ask me for any resources, I just tell them that I don't have any go-to places or specific things. I just try to find multiple sources of information, and then kind of put them together, see what's some things are missing from some other ones, or you get a different perspective and so on. And that's just how I find to work really well when it comes to learning new things. And I remember kind of skipping forward a little bit because I had dropped out of college, but when my first, I think it was like a meeting or some kind of event to like introduce some new students to some other students. One of the seniors there was talking about how like functions are like so hard or like it's crazy and stuff like that. And I was like, in my mind at the time, I already did functions since I was 14, making games and stuff. I was like, really? That's not a hard thing. And that's kind of like, going back to what I was saying about how if you're learning stuff, whether it's school or whatever environment, and there's no direct application to you, or if you don't understand the inspiration for it, the reason it is, you just kind of accepting it as knowledge, it's going to be harder to internalize it, to understand it. You might even feel it's hard. But, if you have an actual use case for it, like you're building something, it's going to be the opposite. You're like, oh, thank God this exists. Like, I need this. This is making my life easier. And throughout my career, and I'm sure there's many engineers like this, especially when you're more junior, there's certain technologies that people tend to stay away from, or they feel like it's too hard, right? And then as soon as you're kind of doing it, you're like, oh wow, this is easy. I should have did this a long time ago. It's like that type of situation because you know can't think of like an exact example right now, but like once you go out and learn that thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually making life easier. Now it doesn't feel like it's complex or hard. Now it feels like it's something that was made specifically to solve your complex problem. And that doesn't just stop at the junior level. As you keep leveling up, things that you thought were like too advanced, too complex, start to become a little bit like start to feel easier. Not because you're a genius, whatever it is, just because you're focused on it, you're in the domain of it, and you understand the use case of it. And like from your mindset, is making your life easier, not harder. And that also relates to things like AI. Sorry, because like I did a course back in 2018 on Udacity around building neural networks and things like that. I had no idea how it worked before that. It seemed very complicated, but just the way that they explained it, I internalized what it means to train a model using, stochastic regression or back propagation, and it just makes a lot more sense. Whereas most people, it's kind of like a black box; they don't know where to begin. I don't have that much advanced information in AI in building neural networks, but I got that foundation that now I can look at these things coming out like ChatGPT and I at least have an understanding of how it could be doing what it's doing. So yeah, like I just from that perspective, people think that things are hard to do. They kind of shun themselves away from it. I would say go for it. Just remember once you learn it, it's not going to seem hard because like once you understand something, necessarily it's kind of impossible to see as now. The only reason why you think it's hard is because you don't understand it. But once you get over that hump, that means when people think that they can't do something, it's just because they didn't do it. That's really what it is. So yeah, back to what I was saying when I was 14, building out these games, playing around with ActionScript, making animations more easily and so on. It was more of a hobby for me. It was definitely a passion. I would do that, stay up mad late, in the AM, especially on weekends, doing this just for fun.
Yep, facts.
And then I wasn't thinking about money until one day, this site newgrounds.com and these other sites was talking about paying people to list their games. And it was paying like $500 or something like that. And to me, I was like, what? $500 for building a game? That's a lot of money. that's nothing. But some people get $500 an hour. But to me, I was like, wow, $500, that's amazing. What I didn't realize at the time was they was paying $500 just for the license, for the rights to put the game on their website. And then they would probably do like a revenue share of like advertisements or whatever it is. But and so it was even way more lucrative than I thought it was. But just that $500, to put your game on the website thing, that really, sparked the light in my fire in my mind. Cause like, wow, I want to do this thing. I love doing this thing, and you get paid for it. That's crazy. So yeah, I was kind of like, figuring out ways to increase my skills. I always wanted to make a game, so I was like trying to commit myself more to it. I would always just kind of make parts of a game and then move on, which is I think is common across a lot of engineers, where we kind of go hard on something for a little bit, and then the passion for that specific thing dies down, and you move on to the next thing and the next.
I feel triggered.
Yep, and I have a whole graveyard of shit like that, and I think it's not a bad thing because you don't want to necessarily devote your resources and time, which is very limited, just for the sake of finishing something. As long as you learn something and you improve your skill set, that could be even better because you can go through 5 different projects, you never finish it, even in like 5 months, right? Back to back to back. You can learn so much things that will enable you to build even more complex things in the future, as opposed to if you had just finished this one thing from start to end. They say the 80-20 rule, like the first 80% is easy to get, and then the last 20 you got to wrap up. They may have been, but they may not have been any extra additional value to finishing that thing up besides doing all the grunt work to make it thing polished and stuff like that. So it could be a good thing. A lot of times it is a good thing when people jump from project to project because of the learning aspect of it. You're learning how to do different things. And then of course, focus is good too, but people have to realize focus is good once you know that whatever you're building is worth investing in. That's why there's things like MVPs. If you're trying to build a company or a startup, you don't want to, go out and build it as if you're operating at Google scale. You don't want it to be able to handle. People ask, a lot of, especially when the junior engineers, they ask like, which database should I use? Which language should I use? Or how do I go make this scale? The reality is, the true reality is, none of that actually matters. As long as the language could build, as long as you can use the language to build an application, as long as the database can store information, you can use it and it'll work. And it working is the actual goal for your side project or for the first iteration of some kind of product. It just needs to work, because for as long as it's not working, you're not getting any value out of it, and you'll never know if you should keep working on it. You shouldn't assume that you should keep working on it. You should only keep working on it if it's worth it. So choose whatever language you want. It don't matter if it's slow. That's going to be one trade-off in the beginning, and then over time you're going to improve it,
Yep.
and you're going to change the language. You're going to change the database, because it's even going to be different use cases that maybe you didn't think about that's going to come up, or it's going to be certain points that are harder to scale that you never thought would have been harder to scale just because of the usage patterns of it. So you don't want to prematurely, choose the best, what you think is the best things, because it might not be. It might be a lot of investment and time into something to make it scale in ways that it will never need to scale ever, because either it's being used in a different way, or because the investment in it completely stopped because it's a product nobody wants, or you realize you're not really interested in the side project, so it don't really matter to you whether it's done or not. So yeah, that's the long and short of it. So basically, kind of interjecting a lot during different paths, but like going back to my timeline. Unfortunately, my mother passed away when I was 17, and throughout all that time, I was building up my skills on the side. Initially not even thinking about how it can make money, and then realizing that it can make money, but still not really knowing, because it was only $500 for a game that I thought you could pay. And when my mom was in the hospital, I didn't know the severity of the situation, that she was going to end up passing away. But at the time, I had did like this. I was working at this. What do you call those things? You kind of get this blue card, to get permission to work as a teenager. For some reason, I was like fascinated by the idea of like, going out, doing some kind of work or business, whatever it is, and then making money. So I was like eager to do that. And then I ended up in this we call this the school program where they assign kids to different places. And I had did it late. I think that's why I did it way late. So there was only the crappy jobs left
Oh, I
from
know
my
what you're talking
perspective.
about.
Yep.
The city youth thing. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. The city youth thing,
Yeah,
right?
the
Yeah.
working papers and all that. Yep.
Exactly. So most of the jobs that people didn't want was the only one that was left. And but I didn't even see it like that. This is just me reflecting right now. Like I had gotten the this thing that's like a janitor role at this intermediate high school nearby that I knew about, and it was like two of my friends ended up being there as well. And over that whole time, I think I made $500, something like that, for the summer. But then online on this forum I was on, FlashKit, which is a forum you go to learn about Flash stuff and talk about Flash. There's a section on that forum for people who need help and are willing to pay for help. So they create these things called gigs. Just like you have a music gig, you go and you get paid to perform somewhere. A gig in this world is a job, a small job where you're not really, getting hired to do something over a period of months. You really just are getting hired to do kind of one thing or fix one thing. And it could, the length varies, but the idea is that it's like a small project. And that's how I really started getting paid to do my work. Because when I saw that, I was looking at it, I was like, okay, these actually, I can help them out with that. I forgot exactly what the first one was, but I fixed something in some small Flash thing, and I got $20 via PayPal. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I was kind of like addicted to it, going through it. And there's this other thing where somebody had this game where you can like rearrange clothing, and it was meant for like couples to like help do games, to like couples therapy or something like that, like power2.com it was. And I went through the code, I looked at it, I knew how it worked just by reading it. I fixed whatever bug there was, and I made some changes. They wanted to change the sizing of stuff. And then just from that, I think I forgot how much I made. Like it was over $400. Like over, it was more than the amount I spent the whole summer working as a janitor for. And I was like, damn, that's crazy. And both of those things though, I never actually got the money, because either I remember I didn't sell the PayPal account or something like that. And for the second one, they wanted my social security number for the W-9, which is something that's very common. But I didn't know what they was talking about. I was like, what? Why you want my social security number? I was like, it was like foreign to me. I was 15 at the time, by the way. I was 15 years old, or either 15 or 16, around that time. And I didn't know like what to expect, so I just didn't even move forward and collect the money from it. But I still did it, and that's kind of what really made me realize the potential
Yeah.
of this going forward. Because now I'm in a situation where, whether it's in the hospital, taking care of ourselves, and when she ended up passing away, that's when I was also looking for jobs. And I would have been doing this anyway because like I was really trending towards that, but that's what really made it easier to focus on that, especially as opposed to school, where I wanted to do well, where I didn't really have time to focus on school because I need to make money. So the first, I guess, on-site job that I got, I had found this listing on Craigslist. Actually no, I didn't find it on Craigslist. A friend of mine did, and he was going there. I was at his house teaching him stuff how to do a flash, like how to make something go in a circle, based on some things I found online about using sine and cosine. Because with the sine waves, they make those waves. If you put a sine wave on top of a cosine wave, you'll just see like a bunch of circles. They won't look like just regular waves anymore. So it's like this thing where you got to make your pixels follow the sine wave at first, and then it follows the cosine waves, and it comes back and then loops again, and it makes like a full circle. So like I love playing around with stuff like that. And I was teaching him it, and then it just happened to be that day he was going to go to a job interview near a high school. I think I was like 17 at this time, and he was like, "Hey, you want to come?" And it's kind of funny, right? Because like that doesn't happen like in the adult world. It's like you go into a job interview, you're not just inviting your friend to come with you and also do the interview. Maybe I don't know, maybe it's depending on the industry, but that's like something that's kind of odd.
Yeah, I never heard of that.
Yeah, but it's funny because it's like this is the type of things that you do or get into when you're younger and you're into this field. So yeah, he brought me along, and he actually was applying for like a graphic designer type job with Photoshop, and he was like, "Yeah, I'll tell them." A friend, and by the way, he was white, and the place he was applying to was owned by two Italians, and this is on Staten Island, which is like predominantly white. So like my entry into the space was already, seeing mostly people who weren't like me, and it was persistent even from that point on throughout into my entire career. So yeah, but he was like, yeah, I'll tell him I have a friend. He's really good at Flash, and maybe you could interview him. So like we got there. Now I was wearing my like it was like a football type jacket, but it was like a Looney Tunes thing. So it was like Wild Coyote was on the back, but it was like that the shape and like texture and color and patterns of like a football jacket, baggy jeans, you know, puffy hair out, all that. And he came in with like button up shirt, button up pants. I don't maybe had a tie or something like that. And then we got there. He did his round of his little conversation for the interviews because it wasn't like rigorous. It was more of like the smaller company, nothing like 5 rounds, nothing like that. And he did his thing, and he vouched for me. He said, "Hey, I got a friend here." He's like, "Yeah, bring him in." So then I came in. I showed him my stuff that I was doing on deviantart.com, which is like a website where people post their art, but it also supports Flash. So I had a bunch of stuff on there, little projects that I did. And he was like blown away. Like he gave me his business card twice. He didn't even realize it, like he subconsciously. And he was like, yeah, we love to have you. And then that's how I got my first like I feel like official developer job. Because before that, I was doing smaller gigs on like just fixing stuff, but not doing projects end to end. But that place that I went to, Metro Inc., that was when I got like my first developer job. And it was funny because my friend didn't get the job. So it was like, he introduced me to it, he brought me there, and he didn't get hired, but then I got hired. But there was no bad feelings about it, especially it was like different roles and everything. But it was just funny how that turned out. So that's where I got, my first taste of imposter. Well, not my first one, I guess. It was also when I was freelancing too. But I remember I was having heavy imposter syndrome because they said that they worked with PHP, and I hadn't done too much PHP. I had done a little bit of experience with it. So I was like diving deep into it, on my own time, learning more and more about it. And then come to turn out, they don't really know, they don't really know the details of the technical side. Like there was one person there who was good at, front end type development when it comes to HTML, CSS, and maybe a little bit of JavaScript. But I was the only person there that could actually code. And I didn't realize that in the beginning. So it was funny to see that dichotomy between what I was expecting and worried about and what the reality was, where it was like, okay, I was over preparing. And this is almost like a theme throughout my career. And same thing happened when I went to New York Times, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It was interesting to see that. And also how the technical side of things was like a mystery to them, but to me, I understood it. So there wasn't as much guidance as well. Like I was learning a lot, but there was no like senior guidance to guide me in the right direction. And by this time, I was still doing freelance on the side, still working on side projects, support myself in high school. And I was, like I mentioned before, I was in Section 8, so the rent was still relatively lower than it would have been if I wasn't. I would have been homeless 100% if that was the case. But it was still problematic. As I mentioned, I got evicted when I was 19. So yeah, I was doing my thing at Metro Inc. While I was in high school, and then went off to college. Did the college applications, and this is a point where I realized the power of guidership network and just sharing knowledge with your community, because some very simple roadblocks prevented me from going to places that maybe I wouldn't went down a different path. So, like for example, I wanted to apply to MIT, and they had like a $25 application fee, which to me was crazy because I couldn't afford $25 application fee. Even though I was working, I was buying food and paying bills and stuff. And I was like, okay, next? What else is there? There was another one, Polytechnic University, which is now part of NYU, which is now called NYU Tandon, and they had like a really popular computer science program as well. And the kicker for me was they offered a free voucher to apply. So that's really why I applied to that school. And when I mentioned about network community, like something like a $25 roadblock, I'm sure if I have the mindset I have now, I would have been way more resourceful. Reach out to people and family, extended family, because I'm sure they would love to help pay $25. For that. Reach out to anybody, really talk to the counselors, talk to somebody. I'm sure there's some kind of financial aid type of thing, or get an exception, get a voucher, especially if I let them know my mother had passed away. See, that's the type of stuff I didn't know about. And a lot of people in situations where there's avenues to get out of it, they're not realizing all these things. Even if it's like very low resource, like you don't need to do anything to ask really. It's hard to know these things without being connected to people who could tell you about these things. The only reason I know about the voucher is because there was like guidance counselors at the school, and I was telling her about my about me. Oh, I did freelance and all that stuff. She was like, wow. She was like very, very, very impressed, and she was the one who gave me the voucher to apply to the Polytechnic University that I got into, and I was really excited about that. I was looking forward to going to a university, learning very advanced technology. I had all these like fantasies about it and everything. And it was cool. I was very excited about it. I had good grades as well.
Nice.
I had gotten like a 5 on the AP Java exam, which is like an exam you take when you're in high school. That helps you with college credit, because those AP courses are like college level type courses. So I already had a leg up and everything. So yeah, it was looking good. But then when I started school, it was a massive time sink, because I needed to work to make money, but also spend time in school. And a lot of these other courses were like, chemistry, physics, things that are not directly going to apply to what I already know what I want to do. A lot of people go to college not knowing what they want to do. Personally, I did. And it was a lot of waste, a lot of time, and a hell of a lot of money, because, Polytech NYU cost like $36,000 a year, like at the time, 32,000, and then climbing up. So it required scholarships and also loans, and also paying out of pocket for some things. And after some time, I was doing little side projects. Also I did a startup when I was in college. Met up with a few friends of mine, and we did this thing. Built a marketplace for apps to buy and sell licenses. Like it was around 2009. I was like 19 at the time, and this is funny. This goes back to what I was just talking about earlier about investing a lot of time. We were trying to build something amazing, right? We were trying to make sure everything was perfect. We were also trying to build a very complex, big project kind of all at once. And something called scope creep.
My favorite.
Where you initially have an idea. I know, right? You initially have an idea of what you want to do. And then you kind of like, as you kind of build it up, you realize the potential for it to go in many different directions and like improve upon it. So for example, we were building software we were building a marketplace to buy software licenses, which is great. It's unique. There's not many options like that. And there's a need for it. People want to buy licenses to build apps and resell apps. But then we were like, okay, well, if we're going to build this, why not also build an app store? And then like, we're going to build an app store and have like reviews and stuff. Why not have gamification? All these stuff kind of like scope creeped into it over time. And we just kept building and delaying the launch, delaying. And then things kind of fell apart, 1 to 2 years, or between 1 to 2 years passed by. People started falling off the project and so on. And then eventually we all kind of fell off of it. And at that time we had gotten different jobs, like full-time, well, not full-time, but, more advanced than what we had before. It's like for me, eventually I had left that place I was at on Staten Island just because the commute going to school it didn't make any sense. I couldn't be on Staten Island going to the office and then the same day going to the school. It was just kind of too far. And plus the office had moved to be further away. So it just didn't work out. But I found another place online on Craigslist that I went to, and I did the interview. They were impressed, by my past work. And that was a great experience. There was even more senior developers there. At the time, I didn't know anything about Git. So that's where I learned about Git from a friend of mine there. I think maybe we were using SVN for a short period of time. And then, I learned about things like, so one of the guys there, he had worked there before and he had left and then came back. And they had trusted him because he had built something that was still working. They didn't have really the technical expertise at the time to decide on who to hire, but they had lucked out because he was pretty good. And he was looking at my code and he was like, he was honest. He was like, this is like spaghetti code. There's no architecture to it. And that's when I got my first my mindset's focused on like, okay, the architecture of the code matters. And this is something where you're building it because there's investment behind it. It's a task, a job. It's for a product that's going to make money, being invested into. So like this is at the point where it matters to maintain your code to make sure that it can be modified without any issue or low cost in the future and so on. Because it's going to increase costs, increase bugs if you don't do it the right way that time. And the right way, there's many levels to it. You could do it. That can mean, you have a good, clean architecture, clean code, documentation and so on. That doesn't mean necessarily it has to build the scale to billions of users at that point, but there's like increasing levels of cleanliness, maintainability, scalability. It's on a scale, like to whatever it needs to support, whatever user base, because it wasn't large for that. It was about 2,000 users, I think, at the time. So it didn't need to scale wide, but it did need to be clean code that was well architecturally broken down to accept new feature developments without having to break a lot of the application or refactor everything. So yeah, that's where I kind of got the mindset of more, thinking larger. And also another insight that I had on the job as well, I was working with this JavaScript library and there was something wasn't working. So I just had the idea, why don't I just look inside the code of the library? And I was like, that sounds like a simple thing, but that's like a leap that people make from just using stuff to realizing that they can go in and figure out how this stuff is working. And then that gives them a better idea of how it works so they can use it even better or use it more optimally or, solve problems that they're having with whatever library they're using. And that was I feel like that was like another shift as well for me in my career. And then around this time, we're around like 20, 21 years old, still at this point, but basically either, a few minutes from dropping out or already had dropped out. I can't remember exactly on the timeline at this point. And then, more things keep coming up where it's like, contributing to open source. That's the first time I did that when I was when I had found out about Node.js, and it was funny because I had made this change within the GitHub. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but on GitHub, you can edit the code within the UI and stuff like that. So I forgot exactly what I did.
Yeah, I hate doing it.
Yep, exactly. Like that's like the new way to do it. Like you don't want to do it that way. I did it that way. It was like something in Node.js. I forgot exactly what it was. It was something real small. And then the guy was like, "Oh, thanks, but it looks like you didn't run any tests. Like this is done through the UI." So I was like, "Oh, okay." So you have to hold this whole process of like unit tests and all that stuff. And as far as when it comes to open source. And there were some things that I fixed in this library called PHP.js and all that stuff the reason why I fixed it was because I had run into that problem myself when I was working with the library. And that's another thing that I realized. All these people spending all this time on open source, a lot of times they're solving their own needs. Like when I was younger, and I'm sure there's a lot of aspirations from junior engineers to like, oh, I want to go out and build these amazing things or the open source projects that get popular. Even any level engineer really. But a lot of times people only have the ability to spend their resources building these things is because they actually need it for their own job or for whatever side project they want to do. Otherwise, it would be too expensive to really spend all that extra time on it, and, and it would probably be something that falls off and doesn't get completed. Or, the investment is important for these types of things. That's another thing people don't realize. And also, I've done my own startups and companies as well, aside from the college one, and trying to bootstrap that on yourself is another challenge as well, where the likelihood of success is lower because of all these obstacles and time, obstacles getting in the way as far as your time and also money that's taking you away from that path. That's why getting an investment is one of there's no guarantees, but it significantly increases your chances of success because it allows you to focus on the company, on the product, and also allows you to get rid of these obstacles that keep popping up. So yeah, anyway, back to the timeline around this time, learning about open source, learning about Node.js. And there's another critical point as well. Like when I had did something in JavaScript, some of the other engineers at the company were impressed with it because they were backend engineers. They didn't really understand at all asynchronous at all. And I was like shocked by it because that's something that's very fundamental to JavaScript. Like you just have to know it. If you're doing like a click event, it's going to be event based, or if you're doing like a request and a function gets called, it's not gonna right away return a result. Like if you're doing any kind of network request or IO, there's other stuff that's happening with the code. The program keeps running before you get the result from that first one. So like it's asynchronous, and just working with that flow was confusing to some of the other engineers. And the way I was able to structure things, their comments on it gave me a lot of confidence. They were like, "Well, you could be making like." One of them say, "You could be making $100,000 as like a front engineer." I was like, "Stop playing! What are you talking about?" At the time, I was making like 40, something like that, and I had no idea what he's saying was like exactly true, And then maybe 6 months or so, or a few months later, I was a friend of mine, really close friend of mine from high school, still friends today. He had gotten a job at Salesforce, and we had actually he was somebody I was working with on that startup I was talking about in the college, and we had done some freelance contracts together. And before that time, we didn't really know how much engineers was making. This was back in like 2013, so now around 22, 23. And he had gotten a salary of $125,000 to be like a backend engineer at Salesforce. And it's a good friend of mine, Faison. And he, at first, it was funny because at first when he told me about it, I don't even know if I told him. I should probably tell him this too. Like first when he told me about it, I'm like, why are you lying? Like in the back of my mind, he was telling me he's making he got an offer for 125,000. I'm like, well, why is he lying right now? I don't get it. Why is he lying about this? He's still doing it. But then eventually I kind of like warmed up to it, like, wait a minute, he's actually making $125,000. What? That's crazy. And then like, sure enough, a few months later, I did my thing going out to the market, doing interviews. And at first I was discouraged because I was doing applications and I wasn't getting responses. And then I remember I did an application to Tumblr or something like that. But then they I think I got an email that they looked at the resume and didn't want to move forward beginning, or they just didn't respond at all. I don't remember exactly what happened. But at the time, I was talking to my friends. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna spend like another 6 months getting better, doing more research and stuff like that. But then they was like, no, why would you do that? Just keep searching. So then yeah, I just kept searching, and then like sure enough, like within a week, I got a response from a recruiter at the New York Times, and they had saw my resume. They saw Node.js on there, which was of high interest to the team that had an open role. So I got matched up with them. I did the interview. Somehow, they asked very as far as like, it's not legal type questions. As far as algorithm questions, it was like find duplicates type stuff. But I had never really done those type of questions before, so I'm lucky that I was able to figure it out at the time. It's not the level of like a trees, whatever it is, those basic stuff like use a map, use an object, whatever it is. But whatever it is, I was lucky to be able to pass those parts of it. And then also one of them asked some specific questions about Node.js that I happened to know about. So I got lucky there. They could have asked me something that was completely different. You never really know what's going to happen during interviews. And then the whole me, and I got that where I got hired as a senior engineer. And I was 23 at the time, a senior engineer at New York Times after that interview. And before that, I had been doing mostly freelance and then those roles I was talking about. But that was my first salary job, first full-time salary job, and I got a senior engineer role. And that just goes to show that it's not about there's no like one thing. It's all about all these factors that add up. My experience that helped me get the specific knowledge that they was interested in. Node.js on the resume. Boom. That was like at the time. This was like around 2012, 2013. Not many people was messing around with Node.js. It had just came out 2009, but it takes a while to spread and get adoption. So like just all that just kind of added up. Where it's like, okay, this guy knows Node.js. He does a lot of good stuff for front end. Oh yeah, I also work with FFmpeg. And that the team at the New York Times was the video team. So like my profile was like a really good match for what they was doing. And then just the question they asked, I just was able to figure it out. They could ask me different questions. You never really know. There's always gaps people have. They always could get questions that they don't know, or they could get questions that they do know the answer to, or that they could figure out. And you just never know how it's going to come about. And then like just the perception that they had from my history and the amount of time I was working on my own since I was 17, getting paid to do it. Like I was doing it since I was 14, but I don't really count that really as part of my professional experience. I count when I was getting paid when I was 17, I was getting paid to do it. And like just because of that history and those things I worked on, they had seen me and put me up for like the senior interview I didn't even have to vouch for it. I didn't have to ask for it. There's many situations, especially companies like Google or the bigger companies, where they put a really high importance on your title. They would, even if you have like 20 years of experience, they could look at your resume and say, okay, well, you didn't really work on that many high school type of things, or your organization was really small, so we consider you to be a mid-level engineer. Like they do that stuff. They download people all the time. So I feel like I was lucky to get into that environment to position me for like a senior position at such a young age, and especially without even knowing like what it even takes to get there, just from stuff that I had done, just for fun as a hobby and also for work as well, at a different capacity, not even like at a level of the New York Times. So I got there, it was a great experience. That was another similar thing happened than the first one where I was trying to learn PHP. They said that they're doing a unit test. And I was like, okay, unit test. So let me learn that. Let me, become an expert in unit tests. I got like a course on it and everything. And then it turns out when I get there, they're not doing it yet. They're still learning how to do it. So I was the one who knew how to do it the most by the time I started. This is another example of me like over preparing. But that was great too, because I got to, show those skills to people, get a lot of respect because of it. One person made a comment. It's like, I had like did something to fix their tests, and I was like, okay, you're smart. I'm not. And I'm like, no, it's not about that. I just learned it. But they're cool. I like them. So that was, I was doing pretty good in New York Times. Very good rapport with the team. Worked on very visible things. NewYorkTimes.com/video, which is, you can say it's like a hub, kind of like a Hulu.com, but like for New York Times content only. And we built that. It was one of the first Node.js applications at the New York Times. And it was a great learning experience. I got to use caches like Memcache, different databases, working with, dealing with larger scale systems, a lot of viewers. Also got to still work with Flash as well. That's another reason why my profile just kind of lined up, just magic, like really perfectly with them, because they also use Flash for a lot of video type stuff. So yeah, it was a very, very good experience for me. But at the same time, I was always freelancing. I just had that habit of always freelancing. And it was a client of mine who was working on this app where it helps you find out how to eat healthier. And at the time, I was doing this no sugar diet. There was somebody at the company, I forgot her name. She had a documentary out called Fed Up. And they had this thing called the 7-day challenge, where you're not supposed to eat any more, no more than 25 grams of sugar per day. And I did that. and I lost like 7 pounds in a few weeks just by doing that. And I was like getting really into health things around that time. And when I saw that project, I was like, okay, that kind of resonates with me. And then, I met with them, and he was really into like my experience, at New York Times, and my personal interests in like healthy eating. And it was funny because on the call, he was like, would you ever quit your job, work full time on this company? And I was like, no. A lot of clients, I have, many people have asked me about that before, and just it never happens. And then he was like, I think I could get you to, I think I could get you to work for me. And I was like, okay. In my mind, I was like, okay, that was kind of weird. But then, fast forward a few months later, I did make the jump. I did quit my job, and when we first, my job was to help build the MVP, and I brought in a friend of mine that mentioned it from Salesforce. So we worked on the MVP, and we were able to raise $700,000 in the seed round. So, I joined the company as founding engineer with my friend, and we had gotten a sign-on bonus. I think it was like 30,000 or so, and that was probably like, that's like getting the sign-on bonus that helps to remove a lot of the risk associated with the jump, and gives you a lot of confidence in it. And I think that's one of the bigger things that helped me make the decision, of course, where it's like that safety net and that that big number that I'm seeing, especially at the time, that was a big number. And then of course salary bumps, we get increased salaries and everything like that. And then we had great equity packages, around 2.5% of the company, which is like amazing for like a founding engineer level. Um, for people who don't know like how these things get structured, usually we get like less than 1%, because I wasn't like we was coming on as a CTO or anything like that. So it was like a really good package. I had spoken with one of these external recruiters who I had came across to during my earlier searches, and he was like, you know what, you guys are young, you should definitely go for it, because we were still building the fence, and we ended up making the jump. But funny enough, it only lasted for like 5 months before the company shut down. And it was still a great experience. I'm still connected with the people, still really good friends. And they actually introduced us to a lot of different opportunities as well, as far as like potential clients, or referrals to companies, because they had like a large network. They were like ex Zynga, CEO was like one of the first 40 employees at Zynga. He was like the GM of Zynga Poker, very, very big there. He had cashed out real big too from the IPO. So they were like very connected people, very knowledgeable, and it was a great experience, great addition to the network. And through that time period, I remember, even before I left the New York Times, I got a reach out from a recruiter at Google, and the subject of his email. Now looking back, is interesting, because now I kind of understand, what the intentions are of recruiters, how they reach out, and like what the challenges they have. And he had like a really good approach. He was like, Google the subject says strong interest from Google, and that's a very important thing to do, because a lot of people have imposter syndrome, or they see a place like Google, and they think, oh, I'm not qualified to work there. You have to be like a super genius or something like that. There's all these false misconceptions that are holding people back. So he was specifically, he was a Black recruiter, so he knew what the deal was. Reaching out to me, he was based on my LinkedIn profile. He saw my picture. What the deal was. A lot of minorities and women, for whatever reason, suffer from imposter syndrome more so than other groups. So
Yes.
exactly. So him putting that in the title and in the subject, strong interest from Google, I feel like that's something that helped me even like, go for it. Because I know a few friends of mine who got reached out from Google. They didn't even respond. So I'm saying, the biggest tech company in the industry, the biggest company in the industry, top of the industry, reaches out to you and they don't even respond to them. So I'm not sure what messaging they got. They got different messaging and everything like that. But when I say that strong is from Google, I'm like, okay. So they see it when I'm working. They see they understand. They actually want to hire me. And this is always the case. Even those recruiters that don't put strong interest, there's still interest. They're reaching out to you because they want to hire you. So that's something that's good to internalize. And I spoke with him. I told him this is actually around the time I was leaving New York Times to do a startup. I told him that I was doing a startup, and that if I'll let you know how things go in a year or so, and so on. And he was cool with that. Google is very, very known for keeping in contact with people over long periods of time, and then eventually hiring them. So that was no problem at all. I was still in the pipeline. Things were good there. So by the time I had, been at the startup, and then the startup shut down, one of the co-founders of the startup, he was friends with the CFO of Facebook, so he got me a referral into Facebook as well. So I was looking at Facebook, Google, like things were looking up. I was in my mind, I was potentially qualified to work there, so I was ready, prepared to interview, or to study for the interview and all that stuff. And I was still looking at other options as well. And Uber came across those options, and that was a product that I had used. I liked the idea of it. I love the idea of it because you use the app and the car comes right to you. At the time, this is like 2013. This is like still a relatively new concept that was still spreading across the world. And that was so commonplace. But it was, especially being in New York, people always ask, why do you have Uber in New York? Because there's so many taxis. Well, for one, Manhattan is a city that's very dense. There's taxis over the place, but still, it's not everywhere. The coverage is not. You can't just go to any sidewalk and say, "Hey, give me a taxi." It doesn't work like that. And especially when you go outside of New York to Staten Island, or Brooklyn or Queens, whatever, nothing like that at all. You got to call. You got to wait like an hour or so, and you don't trust them because the meter. You don't really trust the meter. Sometimes they say it's broken. So there's all these issues and concerns coming up that are washed away with the app, especially the payment part of it. Like you just walk out. That was another cool part of it. So that's what, it's funny. That's the type of thing that attracted me to it. I didn't realize the technical level that they were on, or how much they was paying, or anything at all, or how difficult the interview was. A lot of people in the early days who go from Google to Uber, like some of them got down leveled, right? So you could be a senior at Google, but then you get down level to mid level when you go to Uber. Depending on your interview performance and so on. That's just to speak to the level of vigor of the engineering organization. And they work with very high skill, a lot of real time stuff, tracking drivers throughout the trip, a lot of processing, deciding which driver should be chosen for requests and so on. So like when I entered that whole process, I was just thinking, okay, it was a cool company. They use Node.js, which I loved at the time, and that was it. But then when I started to realize, okay, wait a minute, this is like the big leagues. So it was on the levels of the Facebooks and the Googles. Then I started to get excited about it, and so on. So back when the startup shut down, I was doing my rounds, prepping, cracking the coding interview, Udemy courses. I got this little whiteboard. I got whiteboard paint, so I painted my wall with whiteboard paint, so I could like draw on it. But before that, I got this little thing I could stick up on there. I could do it, but it was so small, and I ended up painting the entire wall. I think it's something I saw a long time ago that I always wanted to do, and I finally did it. And this is around like 2015. I was like 25. I'm practicing like every day or every other day as I'm doing contracts and so on. In the meantime, after the startup failed, I was doing a contract with Forbes. A friend of mine for the New York Times had went over to Forbes because they were working on a side project that got acquired by Forbes. And then I was brought in to help to like, make it scale, make it like, more maintainable and so on, or basically kind of redo a lot of the back end stuff for it. And it was a social network for the Forbes 30 under 30. So the idea was that they have all these communities, the billionaires communities, 30 under 30 communities, and they wouldn't be able to leverage them more than just, these one big events and so on. So we built that out, Node.js, I think of Mongo at the time. And the reasons for using that tech, it wasn't really like Mongo wasn't the best choice for that. It definitely, basically what I remember from the requirements and the use case and we need, I feel like it should have been like a MySQL, like some kind of relational database. But it's funny how I kind of gravitated towards Mongo at the time because of its association with Node.js and so on. And, at the end of the day, it didn't really make too big of a deal because the app has gone through many iterations since I worked on it. So it goes back to what I was saying about like, it doesn't really matter what you use at first. The idea of the app was just to be the kickoff for the whole concept of the social network for the Forbes communities, focusing on 30 under 30, and then, using it at this big event that they threw in Philadelphia. And that was a dope event. I went to the event for the launch party, and ASAP Rocky was there. They was gonna have Fetty Wap, but I think that was around the time he got into the accident. And then ASAP Rocky stood in, And that was dope. See him live, like a whole concert. It was a good vibe. Meeting a lot of people at Forbes. Learning a lot about how they got advertisers for the app and everything like that. It was a great experience. And during this time, I was going through the interviews. I had passed Google's. I had like done really good in Google Screen. Going back to what I was saying about asynchronous in JavaScript, like there was a question that was involved with that. It was a lot more complicated than which would normally come across, even as somebody who already knows JavaScript pretty well. And they were impressed with the answer I gave. And they had asked some follow-up questions around if you can give a talk on any topic right now, what would you talk about? And I was really into peer-to-peer communication stuff because of my experience with Flash. And I learned about these, RMFTP groups. And the idea behind that was, I was broke, but I also wanted to build large-scale applications. And I saw peer-to-peer as a way to do that because you use other people's computers to power the app. If you open the app on your phone or website, whatever it is, and you want to send a message through the application, it's going from your computer directly to the other user, and then from their computer to another user, and so on. Kind of like BitTorrent, how there's no central server, just a bunch of people sharing files, chunks of files with each other. And Spotify, a lot of people might not know this, but Spotify started out in a very similar way, where a lot of the music that was being streamed was shared from one computer to another, and they did it in a secure way to avoid the songs from getting leaked. But that was initially powering Spotify. I can imagine it saved a lot of costs, like massive infrastructure costs. So it makes a lot of sense for a startup to do that. But I guess there was issues with reliability, right? Because somebody turns their laptop off or their computer off, then you lose access to at least like part of the network. You got to wait till they come back on and so on. So there's challenges with it. There's always trade-offs for everything. The benefit is lower costs, and in some cases better performance, but in a lot of cases slower performance, and less what they call availability, which means that the service could be down, or a portion of it, or some data could be inaccessible for a certain period of time. So yeah, that was interesting because I had gotten a really good review from the recruiter who was saying, wow, and it was actually, he said it was a very senior engineer who had interviewed me, and he gave me glowing feedback. And I was like, wow, I'm very excited for the next round. But I did my Uber screens and everything like that. I at some point I had got an offer from Shutterstock. They was paying $155,000 for the base. And so I forgot how much, like $35,000 in stock or something like that. And I was like super excited about that. I was talking to my friends. I was like, stop me from accepting this offer because I feel like I'm about to accept it. So I was about to, and this is a mistake I see a lot of times, especially for people in my community, where we see these things, our eyes light up from these numbers, but we're not even realizing how small they are. And it's all relative, as far as America goes, making $155,000 even 10 years later in 2023 is still significant. But that's not what I had more accessible to me, So it was great that I didn't accept the offer because I ended up interviewing with Uber. I passed the phone screen, passed the on-site, and they moved quick. That was a real startup. They release products quick. They do recruiting quick too. They got me my offer. Meanwhile, Google pushed back my on-site to be 2 weeks, even later than I planned. So I was like, you know what? I'm very excited about Uber. I met a few Google engineers at Uber who work there now during my trip to the on-site. And, a lot of Facebook people, Amazon people, like all these people coming together from all these big companies because they see it's a startup. There's potential to make a lot of money when it goes public and so on. So it just made a lot of sense for me at the time to move forward Uber. So I just accepted the Uber offer. And I didn't move forward with the on-site for Google. And this was like back in 2015. And that's where, I got the senior engineer title as well at Uber. But, looking at what I know now, which I didn't know at the time, that was actually very significant because there's some people call them tiers, like tier 1, tier 2, 3, whatever. Sometimes it could be a little elitist. So I don't like it too much in that sense, depending on how you're talking about it. But in some cases, yep, exactly. So in some cases, you have companies that are regularly working at high scale, very complex, large organizations where communication becomes a problem, right? You have to be able to learn how to operate in that environment to get the resources you need, or to have the foresight to prepare things so that things are going well and so on. But these type of companies, like I mentioned before, now Uber even was down leveling, and again, down leveling is when you are a certain level, like a senior engineer at one company, but then you go to interview at another company, and they tell you actually you're not a senior, you're a mid level, or you're a junior, or so on. And people, Uber was down leveling Google engineers in some cases, and of course, vice versa, right? It goes depending on the result of the interview or the feedback and so on. So coming from New York Times, I heard stories about people, and this is after the fact, who went from New York Times to Facebook and they got down leveled. Like the bar at the New York Times, they don't consider it to be the same as as a Uber, Google, etc. Even when I was applying to Airbnb back in 2021, more recently, they were saying, okay, I'm at Uber. They consider that to be like a peer company. So there was no concern about me interviewing for senior or even senior and above type levels. Uh, but like for New York Times, they would consider that to be, they would have to make a case, or it would be based on the actual background. What have you worked on? Okay, that experience is senior level. You're going to stay at senior. Or if not, they look at what you do and say, okay, actually, we want to interview you for mid level, and then see how you do. So yeah, me getting that senior level at Uber was another big step up in my career. On top of being a senior, is being a senior at a big tech company that's like focuses solely on engineering with one of the best practices, world class practices, high scale, and so on. And it's a lot of reputation in the industry in general, because I feel like me having been at Uber gives a positive bias if I go on interviews at other companies, at smaller companies. They say, "Oh, you worked at Uber." It's like if you worked at Google, right? People say, "Oh, you worked at Google. You must be a really good engineer." It's a similar concept. And a lot of things with investors, right? There's a whole investor community that looks for FANG engineers, and they do way less diligence, or they take calls way more often just because you worked at these certain companies. So I think I would say that was another big inflection in my career. And then I was at Uber for about a year, it's like a year and 10 months or so. And then when I look back, it turned out I was at Uber. I was at New York Times for around that same amount of time, and the other place I was at for the same amount of time. So if you look at my LinkedIn, you see like a bunch of year and 10 months, just like except for right now. Like right now, I passed that mark at Airbnb, but like for a lot of my career, somehow magically I decided it was time to go after a year and 10 months. Yeah, I don't know how it works, but the average tenure is like 2 years. Last time I looked at it, so it's in line with the average tenure.
Yep.
Yeah, like that was a big transition. And same as before, I was still doing freelance projects on the side, but then Uber had this amazing bonus structure, which is actually common. At the time it was novel to me, but it's common in big tech, where you have your performance reviews, and depending on how well you do, you get a rating. So you can get meets expectations, which means that you met expectations, and you don't get fired basically, or you get a bonus, you get your bonus as you expect, and so on. And what they emphasize is that, and it's funny because they actually did the same exact thing at Airbnb recently, where meets expectations, they say meets like for Airbnb they say meets Airbnb's high expectations, and at Uber I forgot exactly the phrase they use, but as my manager communicated to me, meeting expectations like an Uber or Airbnb is actually a significant thing. Like it's a good achievement. It's not to say that it's average performance. It's to say that you're meeting the high, because there's a high bar. They made this. They drive this into the culture. Always raising the bar. Always raising the talent bar. Always getting better and better every year. So to me, to meet expectations is actually means you're performing very highly. And then if you're doing like meet some expectations, that's seen as you're not improving like you should be. So you may get like less of what they call is a multiplier. And the purpose of these performance reviews are just to really codify and get on paper how well you're doing, and determine what your reward for doing that well is. And these types of high performance cultures, like the Facebooks, Googles, they do the same thing. They reward you based on how well you're doing, and they try to use the money to help people, keep people engaged and keep people high performing. Kind of like the carrot stick, right? Stick and carrot, golden handcuffs, that type of thing. So when you meets some expectations, then sure, you met some expectations, but it's not what we're looking for. So you get less of your bonus basically. And there's something called a multiplier, which is a number that you multiply against the standard bonus for your level. So let's say, exact numbers, they don't like to spread the exact numbers. You can probably find online levels and so on. But let's say for a certain senior level, and this is this is a small number I'm making up, 10,000, right? This is a small number for a bonus. Let's say you're getting $10,000 for a bonus and you meet expectations. You're going to get that $10,000. But if you meet some expectations, you may get a smaller multiplier, which is like less than 1. So it makes the number smaller. You get like a 0.8, let's say, or even like, 0.7, and you only get $7,000 instead of the 10,000. And then there's another level, there's exceeds expectations. And with exceeds expectations, you may get, 50% more than the bonus. So like you be getting $15,000 because you take 1.5 and you multiply it by the 10,000. That's how you get your, the multiplier amount that you get. And then there's greatly exceeds expectations, where it could be like, twice as much and so on. So you get $20,000 instead. So now imagine the numbers we're talking about are 6 figures, right? Imagine it was $100,000. By the way, 100,000 is still lower than the actual amount. I'm still saying numbers are lower than the actual amount. So let's say you get $100,000, right? That means that if you only meet some, you get $70,000. And this is there's 2 different types of bonuses. I realize I'm mixing them up. So there's a cash bonus, and then there's the equity refresher. And this term is not as popular outside of some circles, but like at companies where you get stock compensation, part of your bonus comes in cash, part of it in equity. So as far as the equity refreshers, that's where the 6-figure bonus comes in. And then as far as like the cash bonus is still like, about only like around half of that and so on. So we're talking big numbers. So going back to even why I started down this path, I was talking about how I do a lot of freelancing stuff on the side. Now I'm looking at Uber's structure, and at the time, Uber's structure was a little bit more aggressive than other companies. They were paying like a 2x is not a common multiplier. That's my example. It would be a little bit less than 2 times. Close to 1.5 and so on. For the greatly exceeds. But at the time, it was like 2 or even above 2 for greatly exceeds and so on. So they were really going for rewarding high performers. So I looked at that and I was like, okay, do I want to spend my time, freelancing, doing extra work on the nights and weekends, burning myself out? Or do I just want to focus and make sure I perform very well on my one job and get a bonus that's going to pay probably more than the side projects that I'm going to be doing for overall less work? So that's why I kind of shifted towards focusing more on performance and so on. And it was mixed because yes, I got meets at the time for Uber, and I think I was there for about 2 performance reviews, and the bonuses in the multipliers and so on was still good. But nowadays at Airbnb, I'm lucky enough to get exceeds, from all my reviews since I joined.
Nice.
Which has been great. Trying to gear up for a promotion to staff engineer.
Nice.
And just a little bit of tangent. The interesting thing about, and for people who don't know, staff engineer is a level above senior. So you got like your junior, your mid-level, your senior, and then your staff engineers that are above seniors. And crazy thing about how the way promotions work, even if you are at that level, as far as like your ability or your skill set and your knowledge, it doesn't matter. You're not going to just get that promotion. That may be the case for the senior promotion, because with the senior promotion, the rule, and these are all based on the rules that I said, different companies, right? Companies can have different rules, but generally speaking, across big tech, senior promotions are solely by the manager. The manager says, okay, this guy's ready. Let's make him a senior. And then that's it. But when it comes to staff engineer or above, it's not as simple as that. It has to go through a promo committee. So this is a committee of independent coworkers who are not working on your team, who are not working with you. They likely don't even know who you are. They're looking at pieces of paper as a record, and you have to create this thing called a promo packet, which is like, sometimes it could be 15 pages, 10 pages, 20 pages, depending on who you are. And then afterwards, they get this packet, they review it and so on, and they look at all the evidence that says you should be at a certain level. And if they decide you should be, you get promoted. If not, if there's anything wrong, you don't get promoted, no matter how closely you were. no matter how skilled you actually are, you just got to actually pass that part of it. You got to pass that promo committee to get officially up a level to the next level. And there's a lot of times, especially at the big companies like this, people don't make it their first time they go around. People go up for promotion and they say, okay, you haven't done as much in this area, or there's like gaps here, so we don't feel confident in bringing you to this level. And then they do it again, and then they finally get the promotion, or sometimes 3 times, or sometimes never. You never really know. And then what the surprising thing to most people is they actually are, for the most part, a lot of these people are qualified for that level. They just didn't get to prove it. And then the thing about having to prove it is not just about doing your work normally and then saying, okay, you did good work. It's more about what work you even get to do. And that's where like random chance comes in. So let's say you want to get promotion to staff engineer. The requirements are you have to work on a very complex, big project that spans across multiple teams and has a big impact to the company as far as revenue, or as far as, reducing the amount of time engineers need to work on something, some kind of efficiency, some kind of something. That type of project doesn't just come along. Like, you have to actually do work to figure out how to get that, like how to get to there. Like, you have to identify gaps in the company. Nice. Where you're the one. So a lot of times, everybody at the company is doing work, right? But where do these tasks come from? They're still coming from other people at the company. If it's not you right now, maybe you're a junior, maybe you're mid-level, maybe you're even senior, but there's somebody either above you or your peer or potentially below you who is coming up and realizing that the company needs to do this to move forward. So at a certain point, if you want to get promoted like above senior, you got to be into that mindset of identifying these gaps that the company has and saying, okay, we need to build this to cover those gaps. And that's where, it starts to come in, where you can get your project to prove on paper that you can do this. Sometimes you get lucky, maybe even a lot of time, it's not super rare, but it's not as common as you would think for getting promoted. But sometimes through your normal day job, it's just a need and a task you have, or a project, really, not a task, that covers these points of like being large scale, being complex, working across teams, making a big impact as far as revenue or efficiency and so on. But a lot of times you got to go out and find those yourself and create those opportunities for yourself.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast today. We hope you enjoyed this episode and gained valuable insights from our discussions. If you haven't already, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast on various outlets such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, so that you can stay updated on our latest episodes and never miss a beat. Or you can go to techroyalty.net. Thank you again for listening to our podcast, and we look forward to sharing more valuable content with you in the future. This is Mike Legema, and I'm out.